Well, together again? Excellent. I have a story that has been bothering me for many years. Listen carefully. It was an autumn evening in a small town on the outskirts of New England, the kind Ethan Miller loved best. The air smelled of fallen leaves, and the sky, streaked with thin clouds, seemed to hint that rain was coming soon. The old brick streets glistened from the morning rain, and the streetlights were already beginning to cast a soft golden glow on the sidewalks. Ethan walked home, his hands in the pockets of his worn leather jacket, thinking about how rare it was that he got to get home earlier than usual without having to rush. His boss, the ever-grouchy Mr. Harris, had suddenly canceled an evening meeting, and Ethan, unaccustomed to such a gift of fate, decided to take advantage of the moment. He was 37, but there was still a lightness in his step that he had retained from his youth when he had played high school basketball. His dark hair, slightly gray at the temples, peeked out from under his cap, and his brown eyes, usually attentive and slightly tired, today had a spark of curiosity. Ethan was not a man who liked to delve into the past or ponder the meaning of life, but today something in the air, maybe the smell of rain, or the quiet of the deserted streets, made him feel different, as if this evening promised something unusual. The miller's house stood on the corner of a quiet street, surrounded by old maple trees whose branches rustled in the wind. It was a two-story cottage with white walls and dark green shutters that he and Claire had bought 10 years ago when they were first married. It had seemed like the perfect place to start a new life, spacious, cozy, with a large garden where Claire had dreamed of planting roses. The roses never appeared either because they lacked time or because their enthusiasm had waned, but the house was still their little refuge. At least, that was what Ethan thought. He pushed open the front door, and it creaked, as it always did, reminding him that it was time to oil the hinges. The smell of freshly brewed coffee inside meant that Claire must have just left for her evening shift at the hospital. She worked as a nurse in the intensive care unit, and her schedule was as unpredictable as the New England weather. Ethan had grown accustomed to her late nights, to quiet dinners alone, and to the way she would tell him about her patients, tired but still smiling, or about how one of her colleagues had spilled coffee on the keyboard in the staff room again. These little things, so simple and ordinary, were the anchor that held their lives together. But today the house seemed too quiet. Even the cat, a ginger sloth named Marvin, hadn't come running out to greet him as usual, but had stayed dozing on the windowsill in the living room. Ethan threw his keys on the table by the door, took off his shoes, and walked into the kitchen without turning on the light. The refrigerator greeted him with half-empty shelves, a couple of yogurts, a jar of pickles, and the remains of the pizza they'd ordered over the weekend. He chuckled, thinking it was time to stop at the supermarket, and poured himself a glass of water. His gaze fell on the door at the far end of the hall, the one that led to Claire's office. It was her territory, the room she called her sanctuary. It was where she kept her books, medical journals, old photographs, and the odds and ends she'd collected since college. Ethan rarely went there. Not because Claire forbade it, she was never one to set boundaries, but simply because he didn't feel comfortable there. The shelves piled high with papers, the old desk where she liked to work at night, and the smell of dust that seemed to permeate everything. The place was hers, and Ethan respected that. But today, something had pushed him toward the door. Maybe boredom, maybe a desire to keep himself occupied until Claire returned. He remembered her complaining a few weeks ago about the office being too cluttered. "I should clear it out, but I never got around to it," she'd said, rubbing her temples wearily. Without thinking, Ethan decided that now was the time to help. After all, what could be better than a surprise for his wife? He imagined her smile when she saw the office tidied up, and the thought gave him determination. He pushed the door open with a slight creak. It was dark inside, only the faint light from the street lamp filtering through the curtains, casting long shadows on the floor. Ethan flicked the switch, and the overhead light came on, casting a soft yellow glow into the room. The office was just as he remembered it, chaotic but cozy. The desk was piled high with papers, a couple of empty coffee mugs, and an old desk calendar stuck in June of last year. The shelves along the walls were filled with books and folders, and in the corner sat a box of old things Claire had kept meaning to sort through, but had never gotten around to. Ethan rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He started with the shelves, carefully rearranging books and sorting papers. Medical journals, old notebooks, the odd newspaper, clipping it all looked like an archive of her life, a part of which he knew little. Claire rarely spoke of her past, the years before they met, and Ethan never pressed him. He loved her just the way she was, strong but gentle, with a twinkle in her eye and a habit of humming old songs as she cooked dinner. The past, he thought, wasn't so important when you had the present. After an hour of work, he reached the bottom shelf, where among the boxes of office supplies and old photographs, he noticed something unusual. Under a pile of folders, covered in a thin layer of dust, lay a laptop. An old one with a worn silver case that must have once been shiny, but now looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Ethan frowned. He didn't remember Claire ever mentioning this laptop. She had a new one that she always took with her to the hospital, but this one looked like a relic from another era. He pulled the laptop out from under the boxes, brushed off the dust, and set it on the table. The lid was slightly scratched, and there was a small dent in the corner, as if it had been dropped once. Ethan ran his finger along the surface, feeling the cold metal, and suddenly felt a slight pang of curiosity. Why had Claire never mentioned this laptop? And why was it stored here, in the farthest corner of the office, as if she wanted it forgotten? He opened the lid, expecting the screen to remain dark. The battery had probably died long ago. But to his surprise, when he pressed the power button, the laptop made a quiet hum and the screen lit up. The operating system loaded slowly, with a slight whir of the hard drive, and Ethan was presented with a desktop filled with folders and files. The titles were simple: work, photos, documents, drafts. Nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. But something about the simplicity struck him as odd. Claire was always organized, even in her chaos, but this laptop looked like something she wanted to hide. Ethan clicked on the drafts folder, barely thinking. Maybe he was just trying to make sure they were just old work notes or drafts of emails she'd written to coworkers. But when the folder opened, his eyes were caught by a long list of files. Dozens of emails, all marked draft, all with no subject lines, just dates and numbers. He froze, staring at the screen. The emails weren't addressed to him. Not to Claire, not to her coworkers, not to the friends he knew. The recipients were hidden, no names displayed, just blank to fields, as if the sender, Claire, had left them anonymous on purpose. His fingers paused over the keyboard. His heart, which had been beating steadily until now, suddenly sped up. He didn't know what to do next. Open one of the emails, close the laptop and pretend he hadn't seen anything, or call Claire when she returns and ask what these drafts were and why there were so many of them. Questions swarmed through his head, but none of them found an answer. Ethan stared at the screen, and a strange feeling grew in his chest, a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and something else he couldn't yet name. It had started to rain outside, and the drops tapped softly on the glass, as if to remind him that time was passing. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. It was just an old laptop, he told himself. Just drafts. Probably some old emails Claire had written but never sent. Maybe notes from her, or ideas for work, or something else entirely innocuous. But then why did he feel like he was standing on the edge of something that could change everything? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. The drafts folder stared back at him like an open door to a room he wasn't sure he wanted to enter. But curiosity, that ancient and insidious emotion, had already taken root in his mind. And Ethan knew he couldn't just close his laptop and walk away. The rain outside grew louder, from a soft tapping to a rhythmic hum, like invisible fingers drumming on the roof. Ethan sat in Claire's old chair, which creaked with every movement, and stared at the laptop screen as if it might slam shut on its own at any moment, cutting off his doubts. The drafts folder was open, and the list of emails, cold and impersonal, beckoned to him like a lighthouse beckons to a ship in a storm. He knew he shouldn't. This wasn't his space, not his secrets. But his fingers reached for the mouse, and the cursor, as if obeying someone else's will, clicked on the first email on the list. The screen flickered, and lines of text appeared before Ethan's eyes, written in Claire's familiar but somehow alien handwriting. Not the neat, almost calligraphic style she used to fill out her workbooks, but rushed, uneven, as if the words were rushing out of her faster than she could think about them. Ethan began to read, and with each word his breathing grew heavier, as if the air in the room had thickened. Draft, March 14th, 2013. Aj, I dreamed about you again today. You were standing by that old pier where we used to sit until dawn, looking at the water as if it could answer all your questions. I wanted to call out to you, but my voice was gone, like always. I woke up feeling like someone had ripped a piece out of my chest. Why are you still there, in every corner of my memory? I thought time erases everything, but it only seems to sharpen the edges. Ethan froze. Aj initials that meant nothing to him, but sent a chill down his spine. He'd known Claire for nearly 12 years, 10 of which they'd been married. She'd never mentioned anyone with those initials. Friends, co-workers, relatives, their names were as familiar as the pages of a favorite book, but Aj was a stranger. Ethan tried to remember if the name had come up in conversations, in old stories Claire had told about her childhood or college days. Nothing. Emptiness. He clicked on the next letter, feeling his heart pounding in his throat. The screen flickered and a new letter unfurled before him, written several months after the first. Draft, July 29th, 2013. Aj, today was a tough day. The ward lost a patient, a young guy in his early 20s. I held his mother's hand as she cried, and all I could think about was you. Like you once said, pain is the only thing that keeps us alive. I laughed at you then and called you a cynic, but now I think you were right. I feel you in this pain, in every sting. Why can't I let you go? I'm married, Aj, I love him. But you're like a shadow that's always following me. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his blood pounding in his temples. I'm married. I love him. That was him, Ethan. But then who was Aj? And why was Claire writing to him, hiding the letters in a folder no one was supposed to find? He looked at the date, 2013. They'd been married for 3 years. 3 years of living together, of morning coffees, of arguing over what movie to watch, of quiet evenings just sitting next to each other, each reading their own books. And all that time, she'd been writing to someone else, someone who was more important to her than she'd ever admitted. He opened the next letter, and then the next, and the next. The words poured off the screen like a river that couldn't be stopped. Each letter was a piece of a puzzle, but instead of forming a coherent picture, they only multiplied the questions. Claire wrote of memories Ethan didn't recognize, of nights spent walking through a city he'd never seen, of conversations until the early hours of the morning, of laughter that she described as if it were the most vivid sound she'd ever heard. She wrote of pain, of guilt, of trying to forget, but unable to. And in every letter, those two damned initials. Aj. Draft, November 12th, 2014. Aj, I saw you today. Not really, of course. Just someone passing by, and the way he walked, the way his shoulders. I froze in the middle of the street like an idiot, and I almost cried. Ethan asked me what was wrong, and I lied, saying I was just tired. He believed me, like he always does. He's too good, Aj, too good for me. Sometimes I think I don't deserve him, because a part of me still belongs to you. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I want to fix it. Ethan felt his chest tighten, as if someone had pulled an invisible rope around his heart. He set his laptop down on the table, afraid that another letter would crush him. Claire had loved someone else. All these years, while he had built their life, while they had laughed, planned the future, fought and made up, she had carried this secret inside her. A secret that was not just a memory, but a living, pulsating pain that she poured out in these letters. He stood up and paced the room, trying to clear his head. The rain was still pounding the windows, and in its rhythm, Ethan seemed to hear echoes of those nightly conversations Claire had written about. Who was Aj? An ex-boyfriend? A friend? A lover? His thoughts were jumbled, each hypothesis seeming worse than the last. He tried to remember if he'd noticed anything odd about Claire's behavior over the years. Were there times when she seemed distant, Were there nights when she'd sat in this very office, staring at the screen of this old laptop, while he slept in the next room? Ethan returned to the table and opened another letter. He needed to know more. He needed to understand how deep this rift ran through their lives. Draft, February 3rd, 2016. Eddie, I've been trying to stop writing to you. It's been almost a year since I last wrote, and I thought I'd managed. But today I found that old photograph, you know the one. We're on that bridge, and you're laughing, and I'm looking at you like you're my whole world. I put it in a box, but I still can't throw it away. Ethan doesn't know about it. He doesn't know a lot of things. Sometimes I want to tell him everything, but how? How do you tell someone you love that a part of you still lives in the past? I don't want to hurt him, but I can't stop thinking about you. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to block out the words that burned like hot iron. A photograph, a bridge, laughter. These weren't just words, this was another life where he didn't exist. A life where Claire was happy with someone else. He tried to picture her, young, with that smile he loved so much, but now she belonged not to him, but to this age whose face he couldn't even begin to imagine. He opened a few more letters, and each one was a punch to the gut. Claire wrote of places Ethan didn't know, songs she'd never sung in front of him, moments that were sacred to her, but he wasn't there. She didn't blame Edge or hold a grudge against him. She simply wrote as if he were her confessor, her ghost, her broken dream. And each letter was tinged with pain, not the sharp, fresh kind of hurt that comes from a fresh wound, but a dull, chronic kind of pain, as if she'd been carrying it around inside her for years. Draft, August 19th, 2018. Gee, today is Ethan and I's anniversary. 10 years, he bought me flowers and cooked me dinner, just like he did that first year we started dating. I smiled, I laughed, I thanked him. But the whole time he talked about his work, about how he wanted to come to Italy with us, I thought about you. About how we dreamed of Rome, about how you said you wanted to see the Colosseum at sunset. I hate myself for it. Ethan deserves more. He deserves all of me without a trace. But I don't know how to give him what's still yours. Ethan felt the tears sting his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He hadn't cried since his father died, and he wasn't going to start now. Instead, he clenched his fists so hard his nails dug into his palms. 10 years, their anniversary. He remembered that night, how he'd struggled to choose flowers, how nervous he'd been to cook her favorite meal, how she'd smiled at him from across the table, and he'd thought they were happy, and she'd been thinking about someone else. He closed his laptop, unable to read any further. The room suddenly seemed too small, too stuffy. The rain was still pounding the windows, but now its rhythm seemed mocking, as if nature were laughing at his naivety. Ethan stood up and went to the window, looking out onto the dark street. The streetlights reflected in the puddles, creating the illusion of stars, and he suddenly thought that his life with Claire was an illusion too. Beautiful, but fragile, like a reflection in water. He didn't know what to do next. Confront her. Ask her outright who Adge was and why she'd been writing to him all these years. Or keep quiet, pretend nothing has changed. But how could he pretend when the truth he'd just learned was tearing him apart inside? Ethan felt betrayed, but also guilty. Guilty for invading her privacy, for reading something he wasn't meant to see. And yet, he couldn't stop. He wanted to know everything. He wanted to understand who this Adge was and why he still held such a place in Claire's heart. Ethan walked back to the desk, but didn't open his laptop. Instead, he started rummaging through the boxes in the corner. If the photo Claire had written about was out there, he'd find it. He shuffled through old letters, postcards, and trinkets until his fingers came across a small cardboard box tucked under a stack of medical journals. It was light, almost weightless, but when he opened it, his heart sank again. Inside was a photograph, an old one, the corners slightly dog-eared. It was of Claire, younger, with long hair that she hadn't cut yet. She was looking at someone off-screen, and her smile was like nothing Ethan had ever seen. Next to her was a bridge, old and wooden, with peeling paint, and no sign of Adge, just her smile, and that damn bridge. Ethan held the photograph in his hands, feeling time stand still. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Their lives would never be the same. The rain was still pouring outside, and in the noise, Ethan seemed to hear voices from the past that were now part of his present. Ethan stood by the window, clutching an old photograph that felt heavier than the world. The rain outside continued, its steady rhythm mocking him now, as if nature knew his life had just been split into before and after. He looked at Claire smiling in the photograph, her youthful face, the sparkle in her eyes that he had never seen in real life. This was not his Claire, or had his Claire never existed. He felt something crumbling inside him, but in its place was something new, dark and sharp as a blade. Humiliation, rage, and something else he couldn't yet name. He placed the photograph on the table next to the closed laptop, which now felt less like an old hunk of metal and more like a Pandora's box of all his fears. Ethan tried to convince himself that it didn't matter. The letters were old, some dating back to the early years of their marriage. Maybe they were just remnants of youth, first loves that always left a mark, like a scar that aches in bad weather. He knew Claire had a past everyone did. He was no saint himself. He'd had affairs in college, brief and meaningless, which he looked back on with a little nostalgia but no regrets. Why should it be any different with Claire? She'd loved someone before him, written letters she'd never sent. That was normal. That was human. But something about that thought didn't add up. The letters weren't just memories. They were alive, full of pain and longing, written not once or twice, but dozens of times over the years. And in each of them, those damned initials, Aggie, like a brand she couldn't or wouldn't erase. Ethan sat back down at his desk, exhausted and angry, battling for supremacy. He opened his laptop, almost forcefully, as if to punish it for showing him the truth. The cursor paused on the next letter, and Ethan gritted his teeth and clicked it. Draft, April 7th, 2019. Aggie, I haven't written to you in almost a year. I thought I was finally free. But today I was at the bookstore, and that song was playing. You know which one? The one we listened to in your car, driving down the coast with the wind in our faces and me feeling more alive than I've ever felt. I stood there between the shelves, and it was all I could do to hold back the tears. Ethan was there, picking out a book for work, and I was pretending to read the blurb on a novel. He didn't notice. He never notices. Sometimes I wish he would see to ask why I'm like this. But I can't tell him. I can't ruin what we have for the ghost I still love. Ethan felt the blood rush to his face. Still love. The words were like a punch to the solar plexus, taking his breath away. He reread the line, hoping he was wrong, that it was just his imagination. But the words didn't disappear. They stood there, clear and unforgiving, like a sentence. Claire wasn't just remembering Adge, she loved him. Not in the past, not in their distant youth, but now in their present, in their marriage, in their life. Ethan clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his skin, but the pain was almost pleasant, a distraction from what was tearing him apart inside. He opened the next letter, and the next, and the next. Claire's words flowed like a river, washing away everything he believed in. She wrote about moments that felt sacred to her. The night she and Adge had sat on a rooftop and looked at the stars, the arguments they had over books she had never discussed with Ethan, the way Adge had made her laugh even on her darkest days. But most of all, she wrote about her struggles, about trying to forget him, about forcing herself to love Ethan more, about convincing herself that their marriage was right, that it was what she should want. And yet, through every letter, the same thought emerged. Her heart wasn't all his. It belonged to Ad's. Draft, October 22nd, 2020. Jay, I almost left today. Not the house, not Ethan, but myself. I stood in the bathroom, looking in the mirror, and I didn't recognize my face. Who is this woman who lives with a man she loves, but not the way she should? I love Ethan, I really do. He's kind, he's reliable, he's everything I should want. But every time he holds me, I think of you. Of the way your arms felt different, the way your words found something in me he never will. I can't leave. We have a life, we have a home, we have Marvin, that stupid cat who sleeps on my legs every night. But part of me is still with you, and I hate myself for it. Ethan pushed the laptop away as if it were poison. His hands were shaking, and he wasn't sure if it was from rage or pain. He stood up and paced the room, trying to calm his racing heart. The humiliation washed over him in waves, bitter and sticky as tar. He felt cheated, used, like he was a second choice, someone chosen not out of love but necessity. Claire loved him, she'd written it herself, but it was a half-hearted love, like alms she was throwing at him to numb her conscience. He stopped at the shelf where their wedding photo sat. Claire in a white dress, with the smile he thought was his. He was in a suit that was a little tight on him, but he hadn't noticed it at the time because he was too happy. They had stood on the front lawn, surrounded by friends and family, and Ethan had thought it was the beginning of their forever. And now he looked at the photo and saw the lie. She had been thinking about Adge even then. Maybe even on the day they'd said their love, a part of her heart had been somewhere else, with someone else. Rage flared in him like fire eating dry grass. He wanted to storm into the hospital, find Claire, grab her by the shoulders, and demand answers. Who was Adge? Where was he now? Why hadn't she gone to him if he meant so much to her? But behind the rage came a wave of helplessness. What would he say? How would he explain going through her things, reading her personal letters? And what if she looked at him with those big gray eyes and told him the truth that she'd never loved him the way he loved her? Ethan wasn't sure he could bear it. He returned to his laptop and opened another email almost with masochistic stubbornness. He needed to know everything, even if it killed him. Draft, March 15th, 2022. AG, I had a dream where you came to me. Not as a memory, but as a living person, standing at our door. You didn't say anything, you just looked at me, and I knew you were waiting. Waiting for me to make a choice. I woke up sweating, my heart pounding like I'd been running a marathon. Ethan was asleep next to me, and I looked at him, at his face, so calm, so trusting. I can't leave, Adge, I can't ruin his life for something that may no longer exist. But I can't stop wanting this. I want you. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the tears sting his eyelids. He wasn't crying, he wouldn't let himself, but inside, everything was screaming. He imagined Claire sitting in this room, in the dark, while he slept in the next room, writing these words. Words that weren't for him. Words that belonged to a ghost, a person he'd never known, but who seemed to know his wife better than he did. He opened a few more letters, and each one was a new blow. Claire wrote about how she had tried to be a good wife, how she had tried to forget Aggie, but she couldn't. She wrote about the guilt that ate away at her every time Ethan did something nice for her, cooked dinner, fixed her car, just held her after a long day. She wrote about how her heart was torn between duty and desire, between the life she had chosen and the life she had lost. And each letter was the same. She couldn't let go of Aj, he was her shadow, her pain, her love that she carried inside her like a secret she couldn't tell anyone. Draft, January 9th, 2024. Aj, I don't write to you as often anymore. Maybe that means I'm finally giving in. But today I found your old sweater in a box in the attic. The one you left in my apartment the last time we saw each other. I held it in my hands and cried like a baby. Ethan was at work, and I sat there in the attic, surrounded by old things, and I felt like a traitor. I can't leave him. I can't ruin our lives, but I can't stop loving you, and I don't know how to live with that. Ethan threw the laptop away, not caring that it landed with a clatter on the table. His hands were shaking, and there was a fire in his chest that he couldn't put out. He wanted to scream, to punch the walls, to destroy everything around him, to somehow release this rage. But instead, he just stood there, staring at the screen, which was now as dark as his thoughts. He felt humiliated, like his life was a joke he didn't get. He had given Claire everything, his love, his time, his dreams, and all this time she had held someone else in her heart. He walked over to the shelf where the box he'd found the photograph was. Maybe that sweater was in there. Maybe there were other pieces of her past in there that she'd kept from him. He started rummaging through the box, throwing out old postcards, random notes, and old concert tickets. And finally, at the very bottom, he found a faded blue sweater, soft but smelling of dust and something else he couldn't place. Ethan held it in his hands, feeling his fingers tighten around the material as if it could suffocate the pain in his chest. He didn't know how much time had passed. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. The rain was still falling outside, and the house was as quiet as it had been when he'd walked in. But now the silence seemed menacing, like the calm before a storm. Ethan knew Claire would be back soon. She'd walk into the house, take off her coat, smile at him as if nothing had changed. And he didn't know if he could look her in the eye without giving away what he now knew. He put the sweater back in the box, carefully, as if he was afraid to break something fragile. But there was nothing fragile left inside. Only a crack that was growing wider with each passing minute. A crack that threatened to break their lives in half. Ethan sat on the floor of his office, his back against the wall, the blue sweater he'd found in the box still shaking in his hands. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, and the silence in the house was almost tangible, as if the air had thickened with his thoughts. He looked at the sweater, its faded fabric, and felt the rage that had raged within him only an hour ago give way to something else cold, analytical, almost frightening. It wasn't just humiliation or pain. It was a need to understand, to know the truth, whatever it was. AJ. His name loomed before his eyes, like a riddle he had to solve to regain control of his life. He carefully placed the sweater back in the box, closed the lid, and stood up, his muscles aching from sitting in an awkward position for so long. The laptop was still on the table, the screen dark, but Ethan didn't dare open it again. Claire's letters had already burned too many questions into his mind, and he was afraid that more answers would only drag him deeper into the maelstrom. Instead, he began to go over everything he knew about Claire, about her past, about the people who might have been a part of her life before him. Adge, who are you? A lover? A friend? Someone she met in college? Or before? Ethan paced the room, his eyes scanning the shelves, the old photographs, the little things he'd never noticed before. He was trying to find something that might give him a clue. And then, like lightning in a clear sky, a name popped into his head. Aaron Jackson, his best friend since high school. Aaron, the man he'd shared everything with, from their teenage antics to their first heartbreaks. Adge, the initials matched. Ethan froze, feeling his blood run cold. It couldn't be. It was too simple, too obvious. But once it was there, the thought wouldn't go away. He closed his eyes, trying to remember everything he knew about Aaron. They'd met in high school, ninth grade, when they'd been seated next to each other in chemistry class. Aaron was a lanky kid with a mop of dark hair and a smile that could lighten any situation. He was the one who always knew what to say to make you laugh, even if you just failed a test or had a fight with your parents. He and Ethan were inseparable, playing basketball, cutting class to smoke behind the school, sharing dreams of leaving this small town and conquering the world. Aaron was the one who always looked a little further than everyone else. His ambition was infectious, and without even realizing it, Ethan found himself drawn to him. But after high school, their paths diverged. Ethan stayed in his hometown, went to a local college, and then got a job at a construction company, where he worked all these years. Aaron left. He always said that this town was too small for him, that he wanted more. The last time they saw each other was at graduation, when Aaron, already with a suitcase in the trunk, said he was going to Boston to go to college. "I'll be back, man," he said then, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "But not until I'm somebody." Ethan laughed, hugged him, and that was the end of it. Aaron left, and their connection was cut off. A few calls, a few texts in the first few years, and then silence. 10 years ago. 10 years, right around the time he and Claire got married. Ethan felt his heart clench. He walked back to his desk, opened his laptop, and began rereading the letters with a new perspective. Details that had seemed disjointed before began to come together in a frighteningly clear pattern. The pier Claire had written about was an old wooden pier by the lake where she and Aaron had often hung out in high school. They'd sit there for hours, throwing rocks into the water and arguing about what the future held for them. The bridge mentioned in one of the letters was the same one over the river where he and Aaron had once gotten drunk and nearly fallen into the water, laughing like idiots. Even the song Claire had written about Ethan remembered Aaron always playing the same old rock ballad in his car, claiming it was the anthem of freedom. He opened letter after letter, and every line confirmed his worst fears. Adge was Aaron Jackson, his best friend, the man who knew him better than anyone and who seemed to know Claire just as well, if not better. Ethan felt the world shift beneath his feet. He remembered introducing Claire to Aaron a few months before their wedding. Aaron had been in town for a few days, and Ethan, proud and in love, had wanted to introduce him to his bride. They had been sitting at a local bar, drinking beer, laughing. Claire had been as charming as ever, and Aaron was as charismatic as Ethan remembered. They had chatted, joked, and Ethan had thought it was perfect. His best friend and his future wife getting along so well. Now, the scene had seemed like a betrayal. He opened another letter, dated the same year Aaron had visited. Draft, June 12, 2015. Ah, gee, you were here. It's only been 2 days, but I still can't breathe properly. I saw you at the bar, and all I could do was smile and pretend everything was okay. Ethan was so happy you were here. He looked at us like we were his family, and I felt like the worst person in the world. You looked at me, and I knew you were thinking the same thing I was. About those nights, about those words, about how it could have been. I wanted to tell you everything, but I couldn't. Not with him. Not with the life I'd chosen. But God, I wanted to. Ethan flinched away from the screen, as if the words might hit him. He remembered that night. Aaron was the same as always, joking, telling stories about his new life in Boston, about some startup job that promised to make him a millionaire. Claire had laughed at his jokes, played along, and Ethan had thought she was just in a good mood. But now he saw it differently. Their glances, their laughter, their ease, it wasn't just friendliness. It was something more, something he hadn't noticed because he was too busy enjoying himself. He began to connect the dots. The letters began in 2013, 3 years after they'd married. But in them, Claire mentioned moments that clearly happened earlier, before they'd even met. So Claire and Aaron had known each other before. Ethan tried to remember if Claire had ever mentioned Aaron before that night at the bar. She'd talked about her life in college, her friends, her trips, but Aaron had never figured into any of these stories. Or had he, under a different name? Ethan felt his thoughts tangling, like a web he couldn't find his way out of. He opened another letter, hoping to find some hint as to when and how Claire and Aaron had crossed paths. Draft, September 4th, 2017. Aj, I found an old note you left me in a book. I don't even remember when you gave it to me, but it was there, between the pages, like a piece of my past that I can't throw away. You wrote, "Don't forget who you are." I cried reading it. Ethan will never understand what it's like to be me. Not the one he sees every day, but the one who was with you. The one who laughed until she cried as we drove along the coast. The one who felt free. I don't know who I am now. A wife, a nurse, a liar. All I know is that you're still here, in every part of me. Ethan felt his hands curl into fists. The note in the book. The coast. Freedom. These weren't just words, they were the entire life Claire had lived with Aaron. A life he knew nothing about. He remembered Claire once mentioning that she'd gone to college in a neighboring state, near the coast. Was that where they'd met? Had Aaron been a part of her life before Ethan even came along? And if so, why had she never mentioned it? He started rummaging through the box where he'd found the sweater and the photograph, hoping to find the note. His fingers sifted through old letters, tickets, trinkets, until he came across a tattered book, an old edition of The Great Gatsby, the pages yellowed. Claire always said it was her favorite book, but Ethan had never seen her read it. He opened the book, and a folded piece of paper fell out. His heart sank. He unfolded the note, and there, in Aaron's familiar handwriting, the same one he'd used to scribble notes in school, was written, "Don't forget who you are. Adge." Ethan stared at the note, feeling the world crumble around him. This wasn't just a ghost from the past. This was a man he knew, a man he trusted, a man who had been a part of his life just like Claire. Aaron Jackson, his best friend, and apparently the love of his wife's life. He put the note down and went back to his laptop, opening another email. Now he was looking not only for the truth, but also for confirmation. He wanted to know everything: when, where, how. He wanted to understand how the two people he loved most could keep such a secret from him for so long. Draft, November 30th, 2019. Adji, I saw your picture online. You look happy. You have a new job, a new life. I'm happy for you, I really am. But it's tearing me apart. I'm sitting in this house with a man who loves me, and all I can think about is you. How you live there without me. How you probably forgot about me. I don't blame you. I chose this life myself. But sometimes I want to drop everything and find you. Just to ask, do you remember me the way I remember you? Ethan felt his throat tighten. He remembered stumbling across Aaron's social media profile once, a few years ago. He'd considered texting, reconnecting, but something had stopped him. Maybe it had been pride, maybe it had just been laziness. He regretted it now. If he had texted, if they had met, maybe he would have noticed something. Some look, some hints. But he hadn't noticed anything, because he trusted them both. He opened another letter, the last one on the list, dated just a few months ago. Draft, February 15th, 2025. AG, I haven't written to you in over a year, but today I couldn't stand it. Ethan's been home more often, and I can see how hard he's trying. He wants us to be closer, to talk more, but I can't. Every time he looks at me, I feel guilty. I want to be the one he loves, but I can't stop being the one who loves you. I know I'll never send these letters, but they're the only thing that keeps me sane. You're my secret, my sin, my truth, and I don't know how to live without you. Ethan closed his laptop, unable to read any further. His hands were shaking and his mind was racing. Aaron Jackson, his friend, his rival, the man who probably didn't even know where he stood in Claire's life. Or did he? Ethan wasn't sure he wanted to find out, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let this go. He had to find Aaron. He had to understand what had happened between him and Claire, and he had to figure out what to do with the truth that now lay between him and his wife like a chasm he couldn't cross. He stood, determination eclipsing the pain. He would find Aaron. He would find out. And then maybe he would understand who Claire really was and who he was in this story. Ethan didn't sleep that night. When Claire returned from the graveyard shift, he met her in the living room, holding a cup of coffee and pretending to watch an old movie on TV. She smiled at him, tired but warm, and said something about how exhausted she was at the hospital. Ethan nodded, muttered something in response, but his mind was elsewhere, in the past he had just unearthed, and the future that now seemed as elusive as a mirage. He looked at her familiar features, at the slight lines around her eyes that he had once found charming, and felt a chasm growing inside him. He couldn't talk about the letters, not now. Not when his mind was in chaos, and his heart was torn between his love for her and the rage at her betrayal. That morning, after Claire left for another shift, Ethan returned to her office. He no longer felt guilty about invading her privacy. If she was keeping secrets like that, he had a right to know. His laptop was still on his desk, and Ethan gritted his teeth as he opened it again. The drafts folder was just the beginning. He sensed that there were more answers hidden somewhere in this digital maze. He had to find them, even if they tore him apart. Ethan started by checking the other folders on his desktop. Most were filled with work files, medical reports, shift schedules, patient notes. But one folder, labeled simply Archive, caught his eye. It was password protected. Ethan frowned, feeling his pulse quicken. Claire never put passwords on her files, or so he thought. He tried a few obvious combinations: her birthday, their anniversary, her cat's name. Nothing. Then he typed Adj, and the folder opened. Ethan froze, staring at the screen. It was too easy, and at the same time, too painful. Even her password was linked to him. Inside the folder were several email archives exported from an old email client. Ethan clicked on the first file, and a chain of emails opened up, dating back to the years when he and Claire had just started dating. His fingers paused over the keyboard. This wasn't the drafts folder he'd seen before. This was real correspondence sent and received emails, and the recipient was Aaron Jackson. Email, February 12, 2010. From claire.m.reed@gmail.com to a.jackson87@gmail.com. Subject, I can't stop thinking about you. Aaron, I know I shouldn't write. You left, and I promised myself I'd let you go. But I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see you, your smile, your hands, the way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't looking. I'm seeing someone. He's nice, he really is. But he's not you. I don't know how to fix it. Maybe I don't want to fix it. Ethan felt his throat tighten. 2010. That was the year he and Claire had started dating. He remembered the first time he'd seen her in a cafe, reading a book, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee. She'd smiled at him, and he'd thought it was fate. And she'd been texting Aaron, his best friend. Ethan moved on to the next letter, his hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Email, March 3rd, 2010. From a.jackson87@gmail.com to claire.m.reed@gmail.com. Subject, can't stop thinking about you. Claire. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I left because it was the right thing to do. For you, for me, for us. You deserve someone who's there for me, not someone who's always chasing their own dreams. But damn, I can't stop thinking about you either. Tell me what to do. Because I don't know. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his blood pounding in his temples. Aaron was responding to her. This wasn't just one-sided pining on Claire's part. They'd been communicating, texting, even after she was with Ethan. He quickly flipped through the chain of emails, his eyes catching key phrases. I miss you. You'll always be a part of me. I don't know how to live without you. Each letter was like a knife, stabbing deeper. They didn't just know each other. They loved each other. And judging by the dates, it had been going on for years, not months. Ethan stood and paced the room, trying to catch his breath. He felt as if his world, which he thought was solid, was built on sand. Claire and Aaron had been in touch for far longer than she would ever admit. She told him that Aaron was just an old friend, that they had seen each other a few times when he was in town. But these letters told a different story, a story in which Claire had promised Aaron that they would be together someday. Email, July 19, 2012. From claire.m.reed@gmail.com to a.jackson87@gmail.com. Subject, I can't do this anymore. Aaron, I'm getting married in a month. I know I should be happy, but I can't stop thinking about you. Ethan is everything I need. He's kind, he cares about me, he wants a family. But when I picture my future, I see you. I know this is wrong. I know I should let go, but I can't. Someday, Aaron. Someday we'll be together. I don't know how or when, but I believe it. Ethan felt his legs give way. He sank into his chair, staring at the screen, but the words blurred before his eyes. One day we'll be together. It had been written a month before their wedding, a month before Claire had stood before him in a white dress, promising to love him forever. He remembered that day, the way she'd looked at him, the way her hand had trembled in his, how he'd thought it was from nervousness. Now he realized it might have been guilt, from knowing her heart wasn't entirely his. He continued to leaf through the letters, each one a fresh blow. The correspondence between Claire and Aaron had not stopped even after their wedding. It was irregular, months, sometimes years apart, but it was there. They wrote to each other about their lives, their dreams, how much they missed each other. Aaron wrote about his job in Boston, how he was building a career but felt empty. Claire wrote about her life with Ethan, how she tried to be a good wife, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Ethan decided that wasn't enough. The emails were evidence, but he needed more. He needed to understand how far this had gone. He opened the browser on his laptop and began searching for Aaron on social media. It wasn't hard. Aaron had never been one to hide. His LinkedIn profile popped up first. Aaron Jackson, 38, a senior data analyst at a tech company in Boston. In the photo, he looked almost exactly like Ethan remembered. The same dark hair, just a little gray, the same smile that Ethan had always thought was too confident. But now it disgusted him. Ethan scrolled through his profile, looking for any hints of a connection to Claire. There was nothing obvious, no photos, no posts, no mentions. But under the education section, he noticed that Aaron had attended the same university as Claire, the same year. Ethan frowned. Claire had never mentioned that they had gone to school together. She had said that she had met Aaron through him, through Ethan, after college. Another lie. He decided to dig deeper. He still had contacts from old school friends who might know what had happened to Aaron after he left. He pulled up Jenny's number, a mutual friend who was always in the know about all the gossip. Jenny answered on the third ring, her voice as cheerful as it had been 10 years ago. "Ethan, how long has it been?" she cried. "How are you? How is Claire?" Ethan swallowed, trying to sound casual. "It's okay, Jen. I just thought about Aaron Jackson. Do you know what's wrong with him? We haven't spoken in a while." Jenny paused, and Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. "Aaron? Oh, he's in Boston, I think. Works at some cool company. But you know, he's always been a little distant. Didn't really hang out with anyone after school. Although, you know, I saw him with Claire a couple times before you two started dating. They were friends in college, I think. I'm surprised you didn't know." Ethan felt his fingers tighten around the phone. "Friends?" he asked, trying to keep his voice from giving away. "Yeah," Jenny said nonchalantly. "They hung out when Claire was in Maryland. I thought you knew. Aaron even visited her a couple times after she moved here. But then he moved to Boston, and that was it. We lost touch. At least that's what I thought." Ethan muttered something about just checking in on an old friend and said a quick goodbye. His thoughts swirled like leaves in an autumn wind. Claire and Aaron didn't just know each other. They were close, closer than she'd ever admitted, and that closeness hadn't ended when she started dating Ethan. It had continued, secretly, through letters, through memories, through promises Claire had made to Aaron. Ethan returned to his laptop and began digging through more archives. He found another folder, buried deep within the system, titled Old. It contained screenshots of conversations Claire had apparently saved before deleting them from her main inbox. One message, dated 2016, made him pause. Screenshot of message, April 23, 2016. From claire.m.reed@gmail.com to a.jackson87@gmail.com. "Aaron, I don't know how long I can hide this. I love you. I've always loved you. Ethan is great, but he's not you. I can't leave him, not now. But I know we'll be together one day. I believe it. Please tell me you believe it too." Ethan closed his laptop, unable to read any further. His hands were shaking, and a fire was raging in his chest. Claire hadn't just missed Aaron. She had promised him a future without Ethan. He felt his life, everything he believed in, crumbling like a house of cards. But amidst the pain, a determination grew. He would find Aaron. He would find the truth, and he would make Claire answer for everything. Ethan had been awake all night, his mind a churning cauldron of rage and hurt and desperate need for answers. Claire had come home late, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house, and he had pretended to sleep, lying in the darkness of their bedroom while she showered. Her routine, the faint scent of lavender soap, the rustle of a towel, the soft creak of the bed as she lay down next to him felt foreign to him now, like a scene from someone else's life. He stared at her silhouette in the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains and couldn't bring himself to speak. The words he wanted to shout stuck in his throat like poison he was afraid to release. He knew too much, but it wasn't enough. He needed to face Aaron, face to face. It was the only way he could understand how deep this crack in his life ran. Claire left for work that morning, throwing him her usual, "See you later, honey," with a smile that once made his heart race, but now cut like a shard of glass. Ethan waited until the front door slammed and then got to work. He found Aaron on LinkedIn, his public profile, with a professional photo that looked like a man who had made it. Confident smile, expensive suit, Boston skyscrapers in the background. Ethan wrote a short message, trying to sound casual. "Hi, Aaron. Long time no see. I'll be in Boston tomorrow. Want to catch up on old times. Ethan." He reread the text before sending it, feeling his fingers grow cold. It was a lie. He wasn't going to Boston tomorrow. He was going today. The reply came a couple of hours later, and Ethan almost winced when his phone vibrated. Ethan, dude, how old? Sure, let's meet. I'm free tomorrow afternoon. Name the place. A. Ethan gritted his teeth when he saw the signature. A. The same initials Claire had written so wistfully in her letters. He wrote back, suggesting a cafe in downtown Boston, and began to pack. His backpack already held a flash drive with copies of Claire's letters and printouts of the most important ones, folded into an envelope. He didn't know how this conversation would begin, but he was sure of one thing: he wouldn't leave without answers. The drive to Boston was long and tiring, 3 hours of driving under gray skies that seemed to reflect his mood. Ethan turned on the radio, but the announcers' voices were irritating, so he turned it off, leaving himself alone with the hum of the engine and his own thoughts. He pictured Aaron, his face, his way of talking, his laugh, which had once symbolized their friendship to Ethan. They had been inseparable in high school, sharing cigarettes behind the gym, arguing about basketball, dreaming of escaping this town. Aaron had always been the one who looked further, who wanted more, and it seemed he had gotten it, not just a career, but Claire's heart. Boston greeted him with a cold wind and big city bustle. Ethan parked near the Brew, a small place with large windows and the smell of freshly ground coffee. He had arrived early, taken a table in the corner, away from prying eyes, and ordered a black coffee that remained untouched. His fingers nervously fiddled with the edge of the envelope in his backpack. He rehearsed what he would say in his head, but each time his words came tangled, turning into a chaotic stream of accusations and questions. Aaron walked in 15 minutes later, and Ethan recognized him immediately. The same tall, slightly stupid frame, the same dark hair, now slightly gray at the temples. Aaron smiled when he saw him and waved, as if it were a casual meeting of old friends. "Ethan, old man," he exclaimed, walking up to the table and extending his hand. "You look like you've aged a few years, but you're still in shape. What's new?" Ethan shook his hand, feeling his palm grow cold with tension. "Work, home, same old," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Sit down, we'll order something." They sat down, and Aaron began to talk about his job at the tech company, how Boston had changed him, about a new project that could take his career to the next level. Ethan listened, nodding, but his mind was elsewhere. He saw before him not Aaron, his old friend, but the man who had perhaps stolen everything he thought was his. Finally, when Aaron paused to take a sip of coffee, Ethan decided it was time. "Aaron," he began, his voice low, almost menacing. "I didn't just come here. There's something we need to talk about." Aaron raised an eyebrow, his smile becoming less confident. "That sounds serious. What happened?" Ethan pulled an envelope out of his backpack and placed it on the table between them. "These are letters. From Claire to you." Aaron's face changed. The smile faded and a shadow flickered in his eyes, not fear, not surprise, but something deeper, as if he had been waiting for this moment, but hoping it would never come. He took the envelope, opened it, and skimmed the first few lines. His fingers froze, and he looked at Ethan. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. "On her old laptop," Ethan said, not looking away. "In her office. Dozens of emails, Aaron. Drafts she never sent, and actual emails she did send. You kept in touch for years, even after we got married, even after you moved away." Aaron put the envelope down as if it were hot. He looked out the window at the people hurrying under umbrellas and said nothing. Ethan felt his patience melting, the rage he had been holding in all the way bursting out. "Tell me the truth, Aaron," he said, leaning closer. "Were you together? Did you sleep with her? While I was building a life with her, while I thought she was mine, you and she, what?" Aaron turned on him sharply, his eyes narrowing. "No, Ethan," he said firmly. "Nothing like that happened. I swear to you. Claire and I were never—" He hesitated, searching for the words. "We were never physically together. Never." Ethan froze, his mind trying to process the words. He wanted Aaron to lie, to admit to cheating, to something he could understand, something he could fight. Physical cheating would be easier, it would be concrete, tangible, like a wound he could stitch up. But this, you're telling me that all this time she's been texting you that she loves you, that she wants to be with you, and you haven't done anything? His voice shook with disbelief. Aaron nodded, his face serious. Yes, we loved each other, Ethan. A long time ago, back in college. But that ended when I moved to Boston. I knew she was dating you. I knew she chose you. We wrote letters, yes, but it wasn't. He trailed off, as if the words were catching in his throat. It wasn't a romance. It was a memory. Nostalgia. I didn't ask her to write to me. I didn't ask her to love me. Ethan laughed, but it was bitter, almost hoarse. Nostalgia. She wrote that her heart belonged to you, that she wanted to be with you, that I was just a duty, an obligation. And you say nostalgia. Have you even read her letters, Aaron? Aaron looked down, his fingers tightening on the edge of the table. I didn't know about those drafts, he said quietly. She sent me letters, yes, but they were general, about life, about work. She never told me she wanted to leave you. She told me she was happy, that you made her happy. Happy? Ethan almost shouted, but he saw the waitress glance at them and lowered his voice. She wrote that she loved you, that she dreamed of you, that one day you would be together, and you're telling me you didn't know? Aaron ran a hand over his face, and Ethan saw his fingers tremble. I knew she missed me, he finally admitted. She wrote sometimes, reminiscing about old times. I wrote back because I missed her too. But I never crossed the line, Ethan. I respected your marriage. I told her to be with you, to let go of the past. Respect my marriage. Ethan leaned in so close their faces were inches apart. You knew she loved you, and you kept answering. You could have cut it off. You could have told her to stop, but you didn't. Aaron looked up, his eyes a mixture of guilt and weariness. I tried, he said, his voice breaking. I told her she had you, that she had the life she chose, but she wouldn't let me go. And I didn't know how to stop it without hurting her. I thought if I just kept my distance, she'd figure it out on her own. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling his rage give way to something heavier, despair. He wanted to hate Aaron, wanted to blame him for everything, but his friend's words sounded sincere, and that was the worst part. If Aaron had admitted to physical infidelity, Ethan could have dealt with it. He could have walked away, slammed the door, broken things off. But this, an emotional affair that had lasted for years, that was deeper than anything he could understand, it was like poison, slowly eating away at him from the inside. Why didn't you tell me? Ethan asked, his voice quieter, almost pleading. You were my friend. You knew I loved her. Why didn't you tell me about you? Aaron sighed, his shoulders slumping. Because I thought we were in the past. When you introduced us, I saw the way you looked at her, like she was your world. I didn't want to ruin that. I thought she loved you, that she'd let me go. She didn't let go, Ethan said, his voice almost a whisper. She still writes to you. She still dreams about you. And I don't even know who she is anymore. They fell silent. The coffee had grown cold. The cafe was filled with the hum of voices, but to Ethan it was all background, like the sound of a distant sea. He looked at Aaron, at his face that had once been so familiar, and saw a stranger in him. A man who knew his wife better than he did. A man who, even without being with her, owned her heart. What are you going to do? Aaron asked after a long pause. Are you going to tell her what you know? Ethan shook his head, not taking his eyes off the envelope on the table. I don't know. I don't know if I can look at her knowing that, but I can't pretend nothing's changed. Aaron nodded, his face serious. If you decide to talk to her, tell her that I didn't mean it, that I never wanted to come between you. Ethan looked at him, a mixture of pain and contempt in his eyes. You're already between us, Aaron. You always were. He stood up, threw a few dollars on the table for his coffee, and walked out without looking back. It was cold outside, the wind was in his face, but Ethan felt nothing. Only the emptiness that was growing inside him, and the pain that was deeper than he could bear. Claire's betrayal wasn't about sleeping with Aaron. It was about giving him her soul, her dreams, her love, everything Ethan thought was his. And that was worse than any betrayal. He got into the car but didn't start the engine. Instead, he sat there, staring at the wet pavement, trying to figure out what to do next. The house where Claire had been waiting didn't feel like home anymore. It was a cage full of lies, and he didn't know how to escape. Ethan drove back from Boston, and the drive seemed endless, as if time had decided to stretch out each minute to give him more room to hurt. The rain had started again, light and persistent, covering the windshield with a thin film through which the world seemed as blurry as his own thoughts. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't try to distract himself. The silence was his only companion, and in it he heard Aaron's words echo. We were never together physically. Never. The words should have brought relief, but instead they only drove the knife deeper into his heart. Physical betrayal would have been easier, it would have been concrete, like a crime that could be punished. But this, an emotional affair that had lasted for years, that lived in letters, in words, in his wife's heart. It was a betrayal he didn't know how to forgive. Ethan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, and his thoughts swirled around one thing. Claire, who came home every night, smiled at him, cooked dinner, tucked their daughter Sophie into bed, all the while carrying her love for another. He remembered her face, her gray eyes that he thought were so honest, her smile that he loved more than anything in the world. Now that smile felt like a mask hiding a lie. He didn't know if he could look at her again without Aaron in sight. But he knew one thing. He had to talk to her. Today. Right now. The house greeted him with silence, broken only by the distant patter of rain on the roof. Sophie, their 7-year-old daughter, was at her grandmother's. Claire often took her there when she worked night shifts so Ethan could rest. But today he was grateful for that. What was about to happen was not meant for a child's ears. He dropped his keys on the table by the door, walked into the living room with his shoes on, and sat down on the sofa, clutching the envelope with the printed letters. He waited. Claire returned an hour later. He heard her footsteps before the door slammed, light, a little tired, so familiar. She came in, shaking the rain off her coat, and smiled when she saw him. "You're early," she said, hanging her coat on the hook. "I thought you'd be at work until the evening. Want to order some pizza? Sophie's at her mother's until tomorrow, so we'll have the evening to ourselves." Ethan looked at her, and his heart sank. She looked so ordinary, so his. But he knew it was an illusion. He stood up slowly, holding the envelope in his hand, and her gaze fell on him. The smile on her face faltered. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a little tense. "Sit down, Claire," Ethan said, his tone colder than he intended. "We need to talk." She frowned, but obediently sat down on the couch across from him. Her hands were folded in her lap, and Ethan noticed that her fingers were shaking slightly. She knew. Maybe not everything, but she felt that something was wrong. "I was in Boston today," he began, looking her straight in the eye. "Met Aaron." Claire froze, her face turning pale, and she opened her mouth to say something, but Ethan raised his hand, stopping her. "Don't say anything. Not yet." He placed the envelope on the table between them. "I found your letters on an old laptop. Dozens of them, Claire, drafts, and correspondence. With Aaron, since 2010, before our wedding, after, and before this February." Her eyes widened, and she looked at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. "Ethan, she began, but her voice broke. She swallowed, trying to control herself. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" Ethan raised his voice, and she flinched. "You wrote to him that you loved him, that your heart belonged to him, that I was just a duty, an obligation. You promised him that one day you would be together, and you're telling me that's not what I think?" Claire closed her eyes, her hands clenched into fists. "Those were words, Ethan. Just words. I never." "Just words?" He interrupted her, his voice shaking with rage. "Do you think that makes it better? Do you think that this is not a betrayal? You wrote to him that you loved him, Claire. All these years, while I was building a life with you, while I thought we were happy, you loved someone else, and not just some stranger, my best friend. She opened her eyes, tears glistening in them. I didn't want you to know, she whispered. I didn't want to hurt you. Hurt, Ethan laughed, but it was bitter, almost hysterical. You tore me apart, Claire. You lied to me every day. Every time you smiled at me, every time you hugged me, every time you put Sophie to bed, you lied. And now you say that these are just words? Claire stood up, her hands shaking but trying to keep herself together. I love you, Ethan. I've always loved you. What happened with Aaron? That was a long time ago. That was before you. I tried to forget him, I really did. Those letters, they were my way of coping. I never sent them. I never meant to leave you. Ethan pulled the printouts out of the envelope and threw them on the table. And these, he asked, pointing to the sheet of correspondence. These aren't drafts, Claire. These are real letters. You wrote to him that you loved him, that you wanted to be with him. In 2012, a month before we got married. In 2016, when Sophie was already born. And this year, Claire, this year. She looked down at the papers, her face twisting as if she were just realizing how deep the lie had gone. I didn't mean for it to turn out this way, she said, her voice shaking. I wrote to him because he was a part of me, of my youth, of my dreams. But I was never with him, Ethan. Never. They were just letters. I never cheated on you. You think this isn't cheating? Ethan took a step toward her, his eyes blazing. You think this is better? You gave him your heart, Claire. You wrote to him that you loved him, that you dreamed about him, that I wasn't who you wanted. This is worse than sleeping with him, because this isn't just a body. This is all you are, and you gave it to him. Claire shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's not like that, Ethan. I chose you. I married you. I gave birth to your daughter. I'm here with you every day. Doesn't that mean anything? It means you lied, he said, his voice cold as steel. You were here in body, but not in spirit. You were with him, Claire. In every letter, in every memory, in every moment you thought of him and not of me. She took a step toward him, holding out her hand, but he pulled back, leaving her hand hanging in the air. Ethan, please, she whispered. I didn't mean to do this. I love you. I love Sophie. I don't want to lose you. Ethan looked at her, two emotions warring in his chest. The love that was still there despite everything, and the rage that drowned out everything else. He thought of Sophie, her laughter, her small arms wrapped around his neck, her questions about why the moon followed the car as they drove home. He couldn't let this lie ruin her life. But he also couldn't live with a woman who belonged to someone else. I'm filing for divorce, Claire, he said finally, his voice hard as stone. And I'm using these letters. They'll prove you betrayed me. Not in body, maybe, but in spirit. And I won't let you take Sophie from me, or the house. Claire froze, her eyes wide with shock. Ethan, no, she whispered. You can't. Sophie is my daughter. You can't take her away from me. You think I'm going to leave her with you? He asked, his voice full of bitterness. With a woman who lied to me for years, who wrote to another man that she loved him while our daughter slept in the next room. I won't let her grow up in that lie. Claire fell onto the couch, her face wet with tears. Ethan, please, she said, her voice shaking. I'll do whatever you want. I'll stop texting him. I'll delete everything. I'll see a therapist. Just don't ruin our family. Our family? Ethan was almost shouting now. It's not a family, Claire. It's a lie. You destroyed it when you started writing those letters. When you decided Aaron was more important than me. Then Sophie. She shook her head, her hands clenched into fists. That's not true. Sophie is my everything. You are my everything. I made a mistake, Ethan. But I didn't cheat on you. I didn't go with him. I stayed with you. You stayed, he said, his voice quieter, but there was steel in it. But you were never mine. Not completely, and I can't live with that. He turned and walked out of the living room, leaving her alone with the letters scattered on the table. His footsteps echoed in the hallway, and he felt his heart breaking. He loved her. Even now, after everything, he loved her. But love could not survive such a lie. He went up to the bedroom, took his suitcase out of the closet, and began packing. Not for himself, but for Claire. He was not going to leave. This was his home, his life, his daughter. If anyone had to go, it would be her. Downstairs, he could hear Claire crying, but he didn't go down. He couldn't. Not now. He knew he had a long battle ahead of him for Sophie, for the house, for his self-respect. The letters were his weapons, and he was going to use them. Not out of revenge, though revenge was a sweet thought, but out of necessity. He had to protect what was left of his life, and he would do it even if it broke his heart. Ethan sat in his office, which had once been a place to store old bills and construction plans, but was now his sanctuary. The curtains were drawn, and the only light came from a desk lamp, casting harsh shadows on the walls. On the table in front of him was his laptop, still open on a folder of Claire's letters and an envelope of printouts that he hadn't put away since their conversation. The house was quiet. Sophie was still at her grandmother's, and Claire, after their conversation yesterday, had gone to her sister's, saying only a short, "I need time." Ethan didn't mind. He needed time, too. Time to figure out how to move on with his life, and time to figure out what he wanted. But he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let this pain go unanswered. Talking to Claire had left him with an emptiness that was heavier than his rage. Her tears, her pleas, her attempts to justify herself, all of it should have made him feel sorry, but instead he felt only cold. She had said she loved him, that her letters to Aaron had been just words, but those words had been the poison that had poisoned their marriage. And now he knew that Aaron, his former best friend, was not just a shadow from Claire's past, but a man who knew how she felt and had not stopped her. Ethan couldn't forgive that. He couldn't forgive either of them. He opened his laptop and began copying the emails, not just the drafts, but the actual correspondence he'd found in the archives. Every email, every screenshot, every word Claire had written to Aaron, and his responses. He worked methodically, as if he were writing a report for work, but inside, a fire was raging. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was a decision, cold and calculated. He knew Aaron was married. His LinkedIn profile listed a wife, Laura, and 2 children. Ethan found her on social media. Laura Jackson, an elementary school teacher with a kind smile and photos of family outings. She looked happy, like he once had. Ethan found her email address through the school website where she worked. He created a new email, attached an archive of copies of the correspondence, and wrote a short message. "Dear Laura, I'm Ethan Miller, Claire Miller's husband. I found correspondence between your wife and my former friend, Aaron Jackson. I thought you should see it. It's as much about your marriage as it is about mine. Sincerely, Ethan." He reread the letter, his fingers hovering over the send button. This wasn't just a blow to Aaron. This was a blow to his family, to his life, to everything he'd built in Boston. Ethan knew it would destroy not just Aaron's marriage, but his reputation. He imagined Laura reading these letters, her face changing, looking at Aaron, asking the same questions Ethan had asked Claire. He knew it was cruel, but there was no room left in his chest for pity. Aaron hadn't stopped Claire. He hadn't told Ethan the truth. He had let the lie live on for years, and now he was going to pay for it. Ethan hit send and sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. It was done. Now all he had to do was wait. Claire came home 2 days later. Ethan heard her open the door, but he didn't come out to greet her. He sat in the living room, flipping through a photo album of Sophie, trying to find something in her smile that would stop him from making a final decision. But every time he looked at her face, he saw Claire and the letters she'd written to Aaron. She walked into the living room, her eyes red as if she had been crying all night. She stopped in the doorway, looking at him, and her voice was hoarse when she spoke. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, her hands fiddling nervously with the hem of her sweater. "I called Aaron. I wanted to explain." Ethan looked up, his face set in stone. "Explain? What did you want to explain, Claire? That you loved him all this time? that you wrote to him while I was home with our daughter, that you promised him a future we never had? She flinched, but stepped closer. I wanted to tell him to stop talking to me. I want to fix this, Ethan. I want to keep our family together. Family? Ethan stood, his voice as cold as the winter wind. You destroyed our family, Claire. You destroyed it when you started texting him, when you lied to me every day, and now you call him after everything I told you? Claire hung her head, her shoulders shaking. I know it's my fault. I know I hurt you, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose Sophie. I'd do anything to make it right. Ethan looked at her, two emotions warring in his chest, the love that still simmered deep inside and the rage that drowned out everything else. You've already lost us, Claire, he said quietly. I've filed for divorce. My lawyer is already preparing the papers, and I'll use your letters as evidence. You're not taking Sophie. You're not taking the house. Her eyes widened, and she took a step toward him, holding out her hand. Ethan, please don't do this. Sophie is my daughter. You can't. I can, he interrupted, backing away. And I will. You betrayed me, Claire. Not in body, perhaps, but in soul. And I will not let Sophie grow up with a mother who lives a lie. Claire fell onto the couch, her face wet with tears. It's not fair, Ethan. I didn't cheat on you. I was never with him. They were just letters. Just letters. Ethan was almost shouting now. You wrote to him that you loved him, that you wanted to be with him, that I wasn't who you wanted. That's worse than cheating, Claire. It means everything we had was a lie. She shook her head, her voice barely audible. It's not a lie. I love you. I love Sophie. I made a mistake, but I didn't mean to ruin our lives. Ethan looked at her, his heart aching. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to go back to when her smile meant everything to him. But he couldn't. Not after what he'd learned. Not after what he'd done. I sent the letters to Laura, he said, his voice cold as ice. Aaron's wife. She knows everything now. Claire froze, her eyes wide with horror. What did you do? She whispered. What you deserve, he replied. You destroyed our family. Now he'll lose his. It's only fair. Claire shook her head, her hands clenched into fists. You had no right, Ethan. This isn't your life. You can't just ruin everything like that. How did you ruin mine? He asked, his voice breaking. Do you think I should have kept quiet, pretended like nothing happened? You and Aaron lied to me for years. You both deserved it. She stood up, her face a mixture of anger and despair. You don't understand what you've done, Ethan. You didn't just punish us. You ruined Laura's life, their children. This isn't justice. This is revenge. Ethan looked at her, his eyes empty. Call it what you will, but I will not let you get away with this. Not you, not him. Claire turned and walked out of the room, her steps quick, almost running. Ethan heard the front door slam, and the house fell silent again. He sat down on the couch, his body shaking with adrenaline. He had done it. He had delivered the final blow. And now that it was all said, he felt a strange sense of relief, as if the weight he had been carrying all these days had finally been lifted off his shoulders. A few days later, Ethan received a message from Aaron. It was short, but every word was filled with pain. Ethan, you don't understand what you've done. Laura's gone. She took the kids. I've lost everything. Are you happy? Ethan stared at his phone, his fingers still. He expected to feel triumphant, to feel justice served, just as he wanted. But instead, his chest was empty. He imagined Aaron sitting in his Boston apartment, surrounded by the silence that had filled his own home. He imagined Laura reading the letters, her face, her tears. He imagined their children, who perhaps didn't understand why their world was falling apart. And for the first time, he felt a twinge of guilt. But the guilt was quickly drowned in his own pain. Aaron knew how Claire felt, and he hadn't stopped her. He'd answered her letters, kept up the relationship, even knowing she was married. He deserved it, Ethan told himself. So did Claire. They'd both paid for their lies. He put his phone down and looked at the photo of Sophie on the shelf. Her smile was the only thing keeping him going. He knew he had a long battle ahead of him for custody, for the house, for the right to start a new life. But he was ready. He felt like justice had been done, even if the price was higher than he expected. Ethan stood on the porch of his old house, looking out over the familiar street that had once been his refuge. The maple trees, their leaves now glowing crimson in the autumn sun, rustled in the wind as if saying goodbye. Boxes of clothes were already loaded into the truck parked at the curb, and Sophie, his 7-year-old daughter, sat in the back of his truck, her head glued to a cartoon on her tablet. Her small face, framed by dark curls, was calm, but Ethan knew she could sense the change, even if she didn't fully understand it. He had promised himself that he would do anything to protect her from the pain he had endured. This house, this town, this life, it was all in the past. Today, they were starting over. The divorce had been a long, grueling marathon, with every step taking a chunk out of her soul. Ethan hired a lawyer, Marion Kelly, a sharp-witted, steely-willed woman who wasn't afraid to play hardball. He gave her copies of Claire's letters, not just the drafts, but the correspondence with Aaron he'd found in the archives. Marion called it a goldmine for the case. Emotional infidelity, she said, pushing her glasses up her nose, isn't as obvious in court as physical infidelity, but with this much evidence, we can show that your marriage was undermined by her actions. Ethan didn't want to go into details, he just wanted it over with. Claire fought. She hired her own lawyer, a young man named David, who tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance. He argued that the letters were personal musings, not evidence of infidelity, and that Claire had always been devoted to her family. But the judge, an older woman with tired eyes, wasn't buying it. The letters, especially the ones where Claire promised Aaron to be together someday, were too telling. They painted a picture of a woman who, even in marriage, held her heart hostage to another man. Ethan was given full custody of Sophie, with weekend visitation rights for Claire, and kept the house. Claire moved in with her sister, in a small town an hour away, and from her last messages, was trying to start a new life. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to care. Her new life was her choice, just as her lies were her choice. The divorce process lasted 4 months, and every day was a struggle for survival. Ethan went to work, smiled at his colleagues, played with Sophie in the park, but inside he was empty. Claire's letters, her words, her confessions to Aaron haunted him like ghosts. He saw them in every corner of the house. In the kitchen where he and Claire drank coffee in the morning, in the living room where they watched movies, cuddling under a blanket, in the bedroom where he thought their love was unbreakable. He couldn't live in this house anymore. He couldn't breathe the air saturated with her lies. So he decided to leave. The new city, Portland, Maine, was a 6-hour drive from their old home. Ethan had chosen it for a reason. He wanted a fresh start, somewhere where no one knew his story, where he could just be Sophie's father, not the man whose marriage had fallen apart because of betrayal. He found a job with a construction company, slightly less well-paid than his old one, but with flexible hours so he could spend more time with his daughter. They rented a small house with 2 bedrooms and a garden where Sophie was already planning to plant sunflowers. It wasn't their old home, with its history and memories, but Ethan saw it as a chance. A chance to build something new, something honest, without the shadows of the past. The move had been hard. Sophie, though she didn't understand the depth of what was happening, sensed the change. She asked questions that Ethan didn't always know how to answer. "Why isn't Mom coming with us?" she asked one day, looking at him with those big gray eyes so much like Claire's. Ethan crouched down in front of her, took her small hands in his, and said, "Sometimes adults can't live together, Sophie, but you and I are a team, right? And Mom will always love you, even if she's far away." Sophie nodded, but her eyes were full of doubt, and Ethan felt his heart tighten. He couldn't tell her the truth, not now, not when she was so young. But he swore to himself that she would never know the pain of betrayal that he had felt. In Portland, they began to settle in. Ethan enrolled Sophie in a new school, where she quickly made friends, and even Marvin, their old orange cat, seemed to have adapted to the new home, taking up residence on the living room windowsill. Ethan spent his evenings helping Sophie with her homework or reading to her before bed. He tried to be everything to her father, mother, friend. But at night, when the house was asleep, he would sit in his room, staring at the ceiling, and the pain would return. Not rage, not anger, but a quiet, aching ache that reminded him of what he had lost. He loved Claire. Even after everything she had done, part of him still loved her. And that was the hardest thing, letting go of that love, which was now poisoned. He thought about Aaron. After Ethan had sent the letters to Aaron's wife, Laura, her reaction had been swift and devastating. She had filed for divorce, taking their 2 children, and from the messages Aaron had sent Ethan, his life in Boston had fallen apart. His colleagues had learned of the scandal. Gossip traveled fast at a tech company, and the reputation he had so carefully built was in jeopardy. Aaron had written to Ethan, accusing him of cruelty, but Ethan had not responded. He felt no guilt. Aaron knew how Claire felt, and he had not stopped her. He was as guilty as she was, and now they had both paid the price. But even this sense of justice didn't bring Ethan peace. He wanted to move on, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Claire's letters, her words, her confessions. He knew he had to take one last step to finally close this chapter, and that step wasn't for Claire, not for Aaron, but for himself. The night before he left, Ethan sat down at his desk in his office and pulled out one of Claire's printouts. It was the letter from February 15th, 2025, the last she had written to Aaron. He reread it, feeling a familiar ache tighten in his chest. "You are my secret, my sin, my truth, and I don't know how to live without you." The words were like a knife, but now they didn't hurt so much. He took a pen and wrote one sentence on the back of the sheet of paper, in large, hard letters. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what you never had." It wasn't revenge. It was goodbye. He put the letter in an envelope, addressed it to his sister Claire, and mailed it the next day before he got in his truck and left town. He didn't know if Claire would read the words, and he didn't particularly care. It was a way for him to put an end to the past and move on to the future. Life began to settle down in Portland. Ethan had found a rhythm: work, Sophie's school, walks along the waterfront with his daughter, eating ice cream and watching the ships. He began to notice little things: the way Sophie laughed when Marvin chased a sunbeam, the way his morning coffee smelled different in his new house, the way his coworkers at his new job called him Et, as if he'd always been a part of their world. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was growing quieter, like an echo fading away. One evening, a month after they moved in, Sophie ran up to him with a drawing, a bright, slightly crooked picture of their new house, with sunflowers in the garden and a smiling sun over the roof. "This is for you, Dad," she said, her eyes shining. Ethan took it, feeling his throat tighten with emotion. He hugged her tightly, as if she were his anchor in this new world. "We'll be okay, baby," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. "We'll always be okay." He knew this wasn't the end of the pain. He knew there would be nights when the memories of Claire and Aaron would return like uninvited guests. But he was no longer living a lie. He was free, not from love, not from the past, but from the illusions that had held him captive. And in that freedom, he found hope. Hope for a new chapter where he and Sophie could build a life full of truth and light. Sometimes other people's stories are stronger than our own. Let this one remain just a story. Until next time, very soon. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.